Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Roth webinar. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes. We'll start at 12:02. We want to give others some time to join. Okay, we're going to get started. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to our Roth IAMS webinar today. I will let you know a few housekeeping notes. Throughout the presentation, we will have poll questions, and we hope you'll participate because that just gives us better insight into the issues and challenges you're dealing with. We will also have a survey pop up at the end of the webinar. If you could kindly fill that out, that also helps us ensure that we're bringing you topics that are important to you. At the end, we will have a Q&A opportunity. So if you have questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat. You don't have to wait until the Q&A at the end if you want to stick them in the chat, and we'll be taking those questions near the end of the webinar. So we're going to get started, and I will turn you over to Bob Anderson, our facility management consultant practice lead, who's going to talk to us about self-performed versus subcontracted and finding the sweet spot. Over to you, Bob.
Oh, thank you, Amanda, and thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the fourth presentation of a sequence of presentations from, first started off with the selection of helping to select a CMMS platform, helping to go through the equipment inventory process of how you identify your equipment that you need to put into the system, designing a PM plan, and now how you take that PM plan and you take a look at what needs to be done in-house versus what should be subcontracted, and how you find that sweet spot for your organization. So without ado, I'm going to spend a minute going through the quick agenda here, brief introduction for myself, and then go through the actual decision process, meaning it needs to be a conscious decision and not necessarily just you need to take on this service to send it out to be subcontracted because you don't have the labor to do it. But how do you go through that decision process to determine, does it make sense for me to make it internally and perform that service internally? And how does it make sense to buy it, right? And how you measure the components of the different pieces that go into that. And then, of course, from that point, how do you maintain control of those subcontractors? How do you make sure that they're doing what you need them to be doing, the same way you would be managing your own in-house staff? Then we'll talk about quickly go over the key takeaways, and then we'll leave a few minutes at the end of this presentation for a Q&A, and hopefully there'll be some good questions. This is a process that is very involved, and I want to make sure that you understand the concepts, because I'm going to go through it conceptually. I'm not going to go through all the in the specific details, but I want to go through and make sure you understand the concept of how you would go about these decisions. And I hope there's going to be some good questions at the end of this. So as a brief introduction for me, I've been in the facilities management business for more than a minute, over 25 years. And primarily in the contract management outsourcing business, meaning so these programs that we talk about putting in place, they needed to be in place in order to be able to deliver on the commitments made on those contracts. It wasn't that I worked for self-operation, meaning I worked for individual organizations, but I also managed many accounts in the field where it was responsible to deliver on a committed contract promises and commitments, giving them a guaranteed net budget. How you're going to be able to do that is making sure you have the systems in place to, that you can oversee to make sure that you're meeting those objectives. I've been doing this in multiple markets, healthcare market, higher education, senior living services, continuum care, residential community, commercial residential, commercial industrial, biopharmaceutical. Every market and every facilities organization uses the same set of steps in order to be able to put together these types of programs. So there are nuances from market to market are a little bit different, but it's the same set of steps that you need to go through to make sure that you have all these systems in place. I've always looked at how this program is going to deliver a return on this extensive investment that you're going to make into setting up CMMS systems, setting up preventative maintenance plans, When someone looks at a run to fail program versus a program where you've got a robust preventative maintenance system, you can save a tremendous amount of money, and your downtime has been reduced. Customer satisfaction has been improved because your uptime for equipment. You don't have equipment failing and then things being canceled. So delivering a return on that investment is very important. Anyone here that's on this call, you realize you're making a substantial investment into setting these systems up across your entire organization, and it's very important that you identify, what's the return on the investment of getting this thing in place. So, I've been doing this for a little bit, so let's get into the decision process. When you go through the process to decide that you need to subcontract certain services, it's very important that this decision process is something that is a conscious decision. So you've gone through and determined what task can you outsource or what task can you bring back in-house to make sure that you can deliver that service at the lowest possible cost. And you want that decision to be a conscious decision and not necessarily one that's just forced upon you because you don't have the resources to do that. So some of the key criteria, is your facility large enough to support both, general maintenance technicians as well as, individual trade specialists, so GMT specialist, electrical, plumbing, HVAC specialty. If you have the ability to be able to have a resource pool of technical trades that you can train to be handling various functions, then it makes sense to take a look at what's the make buy. If you don't have that ability and you're basically an organization where you have to outsource everything, let's say you have a whole bunch of retail sites, a whole bunch of small 2,000 square foot resale sites all across the country, well, just about everything you do is going to have to be managed by way of an outsourced subcontract. Or you can start bundling some of those with a man in van for a group of sites under, one group, one individual, one group of technicians. So it's really important that you take a look at what your workforce are and what's available to you in your local market, right? If you're in a large city and you have the ability to have part-time work and you're able to have part-time labor to be able to pick up some of the more technical trades, it makes sense for you to bring some of that work in-house. If there's not availability to do that, you don't have that option available to you. When you look at the decision of whether you make or you buy, it's very important that you determine, well, once I decide to make and have that internally, can you keep an at-market rate for technicians? Can you keep them trained and keep them? Or are they going to leave because you can get that much more money outside of your workforce? And that's important. So you understand, what resources you have, what your pay scale is within the organization itself and within your local market space. If you go through the process and train a bunch of people to do certain tasks, and now you basically train your entire workforce to leave because they can make more money, that might not be the right option for you, right? When you look at bringing tasks in-house, you want to make sure that you have enough that can pay for the individual. So if you only have, and we're going to go through this in a few minutes, looking at on a weekly basis, how many hours per individual trade, once you start approaching that 1 FTE, that you've got 37 and a half or 40 hours worth of productive work for that specific type of trade, then it really makes a heck of a lot of sense to start looking at bringing this in-house. It's going to save you a considerable amount of money. If you only have, 2 or 3 hours per week that is required for a specific trade, then it doesn't make sense to be looking at bringing that thing in-house, and it makes more sense to subcontract for it. You can still deliver the same service at a much lower cost. So again, when you start looking at the decision process of what, how you go about making these decisions, I mentioned earlier we went through other training sessions, and we had a recent webinar on mastering equipment inventory and tagging and how you go about that process. And one of the things we learned is what percentage of maintenance tasks are subcontracted. And one of the poll questions, and we're going to have a few poll questions in this session as well. Roughly 41% of attendees, they subcontract between 10 and 25%, and 24% subcontract 25 to 50%. That means you are subcontracting a lot of work. Most organizations are subcontracting a lot of work. Now, are you contracting that work as the entire scope of work for the individuals. In other words, let's say you have some HVAC package units on the roof. Do you subcontract out all the work that needs to be done for those package units, or you just subcontract specific tasks that need to be done on that equipment? And that's something you need to take a look at internally. This way here, you can split tasks into, what you do internally and versus what you do outside, but you still have a certain amount of technical labor internally that you have to work on that equipment. Some other key things that you're looking at from the decision process, you don't have the resources internally to do the work, right? You currently don't have the technical resources that you need to do that work. That means you're going to have to train, you're going to have to develop. The resources in the area are not available. I'll give you a great example of that. The idea of having a brake lathe machine for a brake shop. There are very few people that actually have brake lathe machines anymore. Doesn't even exist. They just buy new rotors, I guess, out there. So the idea of having somebody that actually would be able to operate that equipment within a given, or repair that equipment within a 500-mile radius, you might not even have anybody that's available to you. So, knowing what resources are available for the type of equipment that you need to service is very important. What's available to you in your market area, so that you can compare that against, does it make sense to bring it in-house or not, right? If you have budget cuts that force a leaner approach, and you have costs that are being reduced, your department's being somewhat shrunk down, you need to make sure that you understand, well, when you shrink down a department, it might cost more money by shrinking down, because now you have to subcontract other functions, and that's actually going to cost you more on your subcontracted cost. So you might actually be increasing the cost of the department as opposed to decreasing the total cost of ownership of the equipment, right? Another decision factor that comes in is as the scope changes, and you start replacing older equipment with some newer equipment that require more technical labor that you don't currently have trained on your staff today, and that technical labor is needed, and you don't have the ability to get them trained to be able to bring them up to speed. So your equipment has changed, and the responsibility, the training for that has changed. That becomes part of a decision process to determine whether or not you're going to outsource that function or those specific pieces of equipment. And the most important thing is, the whole process should become a decision based upon analysis and fact and data, good data of what you need to take care of. You don't want to make sure that the equipment is being outsourced because you don't have the people to do it. You want to make sure that the reason is that the best cost, the most efficient cost, is going to be handled in a specific way. What are some of the drivers, right? Again, I mentioned about the technicality of the work, which is going to require specialized training. You have an internal budget that has been reduced or been increased so that you can actually bring more labor on. This whole process is a communicated process where you work with your finance team, so they understand that by bringing something in-house, is going to end up costing you less, because you're going to be able to handle that function, independent of the total budget. By bringing certain things, by making that function internally, you're going to lower the overall operational cost of your department. And it's important that is communicated up and down your organization, so that when it comes time to make those decisions, you have the ability to bring that new person on at a specific type of rate. It's important, and we're going to go through the dividing up of tasks. All right, when you look at the tasks that are being performed, subcontracted tasks that are being performed, you want to look at your PM activities so that you can look at the tasks that you can split off for certain pieces of equipment. And what I mean by split off is, let's say you're going to do filter changes for HVAC equipment. So you can actually hire a filter company, come in and do that. And you might be able to do that as one fell swoop, and they come in and do everything at once. The cost of doing that and the labor needed to do that is much more effective than having your in-house staff do that. It's just a specific task that's not complete preventative maintenance of that equipment, but it is a task. Same thing holds true with things such as infrared scans for your main panels and your distribution panels. It's a very simple task that can be done. You can do that internally, or you can actually subcontract just for that specific task. This way here, the function's being done, and it's being done at the lowest possible cost. So what are the pros and cons of subcontracting? When you're performing the work in-house, you have greater control over the work that's being done. You assign a task to an individual to take care of a specific preventative maintenance set of tasks, and you can control what they do when they do it. It aligns with your work culture, all right? And what I mean by that is when you have individuals that are then assigned for specific pieces of equipment, they have ownership of that equipment, and they have ownership of delivering that service. And it really fosters employee loyalty because they know that they're needed at that organization. The more you outsource, the less technicality of the equipment that you're handling internally. You start to lose individuals who know that they have a growth potential to learn more about what it is that they do. And by having it in-house, you're going to really help keep your workforce engaged. From the cons, it's going to be significant investment in hiring. If you have to insource, you're going to perform that function in-house, you're going to cost you more on labor on an hourly rate than it might for just having a general maintenance technician. So you have a significant investment in both the hiring and the training. You need to have an infrastructure internally to make sure that those individuals are going to remain current on tasks and functions that affect the equipment that they're working on. So it's not a one and done. I train somebody to be my HVAC tech, and now he can handle everything for all pieces of equipment from that point forward. That is definitely not true. They need to be continuously trained so that they understand what's happening in the market, what new equipment's coming in, new technology to manage how they're working on what they're doing. And it's very important that you have an infrastructure to make sure that continual training takes place. Another con in reference to this is the limited access to specialized tools. If you have a piece of equipment that requires very specialized piece of equipment that are very expensive, and it doesn't make sense because you only use that thing twice per year, it just might not make any sense at all, to look at bringing that function in-house. All of these come into play when you're trying to determine what makes sense to keep in-house and what makes sense to subcontract. The best choice depends upon the work importance and the expertise budget and the company's goals. There's a lot of factors to take into place. And when you're making the decision on whether or not something should be done in-house or subcontracted, you really want to analyze all of these different components so that you can deliver the service at its most productive and least possible cost. Is there any kind of a standard percentage? No, there's no. I mean, every organization is going to be different depending upon, whether or not your organization is large enough to have in-house labor, where you have dedicated labor for general maintenance technicians plus skilled technicians, or whether or not you just have just straight GMTs. I mentioned down here the healthcare biomedical test case is a perfect example. In the healthcare industry, for the longest time, pieces of equipment would be sold and it would be sold with a maintenance contract included in it because it's a highly technical piece of equipment. And so over a given period of time, that the technology for that equipment now becomes more commonplace. So at a given point in time, it makes sense to bring that piece of work in-house as opposed to be paying premium to have the outside subcontractor be with the manufacturer, right? So in many cases, many organizations have gone to third-party type subcontracts where that third party now is responsible for managing all of that equipment. And they can save a boatload of money because they brought this thing from a manufacturer's warranty, a manufacturer's type contract to a third party, and then brought some of it in-house completely so that you can continuously reduce the overall cost. Very common practice that's been going on in the healthcare industry for many, many years. But what's most important is that you know what your subcontracted percentage is. Do you know? If you don't know what percentage of the total work, and there's the money side of this, there's a total cost of this, but there's also the total number of hours and the total number of hours by trade. So you need to know what percentage of your organization, what percentage of your total costs and your total hours that you're managing for your equipment is being done by outside subcontractors. Um, so when you look at, no on-site demand, labor eliminates labor PMs, right? You need to know what your demand has been for the equipment that you are currently managing today. Meaning if you have a whole bunch of equipment that is constantly, under repair and constantly has issues, that is something that you want to take a look at. Well, does it make sense for me to replace it? Or does it make sense for me to have somebody that can handle it on site, or make sure that I have somebody that's a man in van that can actually go out and do the work? It's really important that you know what the equipment history is of that equipment, of all your equipment. So you know where your problem childs are, and you know what the best way to service them is going to be going forward. Now, your needs change and resources change over time. I mentioned about bringing in, new pieces of equipment that, require specialty trades and specialty skills, and maybe even some specialty equipment. Knowing what those new requirements are going to be for that equipment is really important, so that you can plan, do I keep it in-house or do I subcontract it? A factor that comes into play quite a bit is, the loss of long-term technical labor. You've had an operator that's been your main plant operator for quite a long time. He knows how to operate all the equipment there, and you lose them. Either they age out, or they decide to take another role someplace else. When you lose that long-term technical labor that has the skill sets that you need, does it make sense to bring somebody in-house and train them and to be able to pick up all that equipment? Or does it make sense to to buy that as a subcontracted component? So how do you measure the different components? And the different components, meaning the tasks that need to be completed, really are all built on the equipment that you have, and making sure that you know what the requirements of that equipment are, right? Making sure you've got a complete inventory of all your equipment. You can't get to the stage of defining PM plans and defining what's going to be in-house or in-house if you don't even have an inventory. I mean, you're just kind of winging it, right? So making sure you have an inventory of your technician skill set, so that you know what technicians you have, what are they capable of taking on, and what they can't, what you need to make sure you send out. Make sure you have that historical data on repair histories. Make sure you know what's been asked for demand. Make sure it's been asked for equipment repairs because equipment's been breaking down. Having that information before you sit down to do the PM plan and come up with a resource plan for outsourcing is very important. That you look at all of these pieces, make sure you have them ready and you're ready to go with them. There's a group of different steps that you go through, and there's probably 8 steps to creating a good PM schedule with task assignments by the different functions, by the different pieces of equipment. Make sure you identify all your assets. Make sure you identify what equipment. Make sure you know what is in your inventory. Totally, not just the inventory that you say or think you need to take care of, but everything that you are responsible for. So you should have a complete inventory of all the equipment that needs to be maintained in order to keep your facility up and running. You need to determine all the maintenance tasks that need to take place with that equipment. And when I say determine the maintenance tasks, it's not just a PM on a piece of equipment, but what diagnostics need to be done on that equipment on a scheduled basis, so you can predict what's going to happen to it in the near future. Having all those tasks listed out by equipment, you can then determine who will perform them. Right? You need to define when the tasks need to be done. So define the maintenance intervals. They're going to be done monthly, quarterly, annual, biannual. Define that and make sure that you actually know how many hours you're going to need for each piece of equipment to maintain that at its highest level of efficiency and uptime. Define the maintenance procedures that you're going to go through to actually perform at those different intervals. Make sure you've got a set of steps that you've determined what you need to do for that equipment to maintain it. Many times organizations will subcontract for things before they've even defined the maintenance procedures, and basically they're taking it upon you're taking their lead from their subcontractor as to what needs to be done. You need to work very closely to make sure that you're having done what needs to be done to maintain your equipment, and not necessarily just what the subcontractor is that is capable of performing for you. And that will obviously make a big decision as to who you actually have do the work. All right. But it's important you're in control of defining what those procedures should be. You need to be able to then, schedule all those maintenance tasks, and then you need to track them, right? So you need to, implement that schedule, and then and make sure that it's being done that meets the needs of that equipment. If you need to increase it over a period of time because the equipment's aging or because the equipment is reaching its useful lifespan, it's important that whole process becomes a dynamic process and not a static process. If you have a PM schedule, a PM plan that never changes over a 15-year window, then obviously something's not going to be quite right, because at some given point in time, pieces of equipment are going to need more maintenance than what they need when they're originally installed. So it's important that you look at that PM schedule, that you're monitoring it and you're adjusting it to make sure that it's going to keep that equipment up and running for as long as you can own it, right? Make sure you get the full useful life out of that equipment. You always want to go back, take a look at this thing on a continual basis and evaluate and optimize it so that it makes sense both internally from an internal labor perspective and an outsourcing perspective. Key criteria, is making sure you understand how many hours per trade per week, and what is available to you from a resource perspective, be it part-time, full-time. You need to know what your hourly rates are, your fully burdened rates internally, and what you can buy that fully burdened rate, what you can buy that service for outside. You need to be able to compare those two rates. It's not just the amount of money you're paying the individual, but it's what the total cost of the organization is for that person, right? I mentioned before about, all trades should be considered in increments of one. Once you see that, your total responsibility for a specific trade has reached a full FTE, then it makes a lot of sense to be really taking a look at, bringing that type of service in-house. All right. Now, this is our first poll question, and I've reached that stage. And the first poll question here is, do you know the number of resource hours needed by trade to maintain the equipment you're responsible for? And this is actually a two-part question. And the first part is, do you know the total number of, do you have a complete inventory, right? And do you have the total number of hours by trade, by the piece of equipment? So yes, you've got a complete, up-to-date, partial, you also have, or you're not sure, so where are you at in that? So I'm going to give you a second to answer that question. And then there's another follow-up question that goes with that. And as I see the responses, I got two responses. We've got a bunch of people bringing it in now. Before I jump to the second question here, I'm going to just give you another second to answer that. So right now we've got about 6 people, and I want to keep us rolling along here. So I just want people thinking about this, because this is really important for you to understand as you go forward, making the decision, by making the decision of what stays in-house and what goes outside. So let's see here. What do we have for results of right now? Roughly partial. Okay, so it looks like some people are doing this. Yes, and there's a good percentage, about 30%, that have no knowledge of how many hours it takes to it's well more than that. It's actually a total of 30, 40, 45% have no idea how many hours they actually spend on outside labor. All right. Only about 12% of the participants here actually have a good handle on the number of hours that are responsible. The second poll question, on the same set of ideas is, do you know the total number of resource hours needed by trade to maintain the equipment you're responsible for? This question here, it builds upon, you've got the inventory, you've got a system in place. Do you know how many hours that you're actually using, that you actually have assigned for technical trade labor? Do you know what those numbers are on a week-to-week basis? And I'll give you another minute or so to answer the second question here. We got right now. There's again, it was probably the same. It's about the same. We got about 60% don't really have an idea of the number of hours that they're actually spending on technical trades labor. If you don't know how many hours you need by trade, you can't go forward and design a plan to outsource specific functions until you really know how many hours you need for those different pieces. So it's something that you really need to take a look at. And I'm going to show you how you go about doing that. It's not something that you just jump into. You really need to take a look at. And right here, I simplified this in a basic way. So and this is just a 12-month. It should be done by week, because you want to make sure that you've assigned different weeks of the year that you have low labor because of the fact you've got holiday weeks, you've got vacation weeks. So you want to make sure you know how many hours of the different pieces are being done, on a week by week basis. Here I'm showing, I don't know, about 10, 12 pieces of equipment. You might have 1,000 pieces of equipment, 2,000 pieces of equipment that you're responsible for. So this spreadsheet can get very large and get fairly complex, but it's important that you go through this analysis and you use your CMMS platform to help you get this information. So you know how many hours of things, of technical trades that you need to cover. In this particular case, I'm just a model, a sample model here where you've got X number of hours on a monthly basis. You've got a few hours of total hours of PMs, and you've got 1 hour of plumbing and 3 hours of HVAC. And this is a concept, but you'll understand that as you go through this over a 52-week span, over 4,000 pieces of equipment, as you can see, this thing would grow where you would have a huge number of hours that would be responsible by each individual trade and by each individual week. If you don't have the hours covered to do the work, whether it's in-house or outside, then the PM isn't really going to get completed, and the tasks of the PM aren't going to get done. And then you're going to start to see pieces of equipment break down because you're not really maintaining it to what you need to maintain it with. So once you've gone through that process and you've determined how many hours are being spent on the different functions, now you can go back and take a look at what makes sense for me to outsource, what makes sense for me to start using an outside subcontractor for. By doing this, you're now determining what needs to go out and what needs to stay in-house. What do I need to do to train my people to cover these services? By going through this exercise with all of your equipment, it really gives you a good handle on what needs to be outsourced, what needs to come in-house, what training do I need to develop for my staff, and what things do I need to make sure that I keep an eye on over the long term of the life expectancy of that equipment. As I mentioned, when you look at your entire PM plan, this process can get very involved and it can get very large. I don't want to oversimplify what it takes to actually accomplish this. But if you go through the process and you list out all of the different equipment that you have, and you list out all the different PMs that you need to perform, and you list out the tasks for the individual pieces of equipment, now you know what should I do in-house and what should I be doing outside. Okay. The next poll question that we have here is this is the third poll question, and do you have technical trades on your facility staff, right? The question here is, do you have technical trades beyond your general maintenance technicians? Do you have, not necessarily licensed electricians and licensed HVAC technicians, but do you have the ability to have those trades available to you to be able to, bring these different services in-house? I'm looking at the results here, and it looks like that we have they have good above 60% do have technical trades, in-house trades, and then there's another 44 that have a good mix. Very few people on the call today have fully outsourced. Very few people, and it seems here that nobody's unsure. They have a good feel for what work is being done in-house and what work is being done outside, and that's great, because at least you know where you are and you know what trades are available to you. So based upon that, a good percentage of those the audience here today, roughly 90%, have technical trades and either are doing it as a hybrid or they're doing it as a hybrid or they're doing it with a certain amount of outsourcing. They know what the mix is and they know what trades they have available to them. So next, how do you maintain control of your subcontractors? When you have a subcontractor and they are performing tasks and functions for you, it's important that you treat them in many ways like you would be treating your own staff. I mean, you determine what tasks need to be done. You would issue a PM. They would complete that PM, and then you would put that information into your CMMS system the same way that you would put that information into from one of your techs performing that work. I've seen many organizations where they subcontract out a group of services. They get a report from that subcontractor, and it stays in a folder, and they never actually use any of that information for the equipment history for that piece of equipment. And they rely totally on the subcontractor to tell them what needs to be done. It's very important that you work very closely with them so that you maintain control of what is being scheduled to be done at their next set of activities. It's also really important because at the end of the year, if you want to know how many hours your subcontractors are spending on specific pieces of equipment, you can go back to that and determine, am I getting real value from my subcontractors today? If you don't know how much time they're spending on the equipment, you don't know how many hours, you don't know what tasks they've completed, and you just rely on them to say that the equipment's up and running the way you need it to be, you really have no negotiating stance with them. If they tell you they need to increase their costs because of whatever, you don't know if you're really getting the value that you're expecting to achieve. So the next poll question here is, do you track hours on your on-site subcontractors back to the equipment being served? How many of the audience here are actually tracking the hours that your subcontractors perform for the equipment that they're currently responsible to take care of? Are you treating them in many ways like you would treat an in-house individual? And it's important for you to know, that you use that information in your CMMS system, and that way there you're able to have those information to make good data decisions, at the end of the year. Some of the result, the polls coming back here, and a huge percentage, well over 50%, are not tracking any time or cost back to the individual or work histories back to the equipment. You're losing a lot of information that you can be using to make plans for capital replacement. You're using that information to plan for a capital repair as opposed to a break, as opposed to waiting for it to break, fix, fail. Good example on that is if your subcontractor tells you that you need to have a coil replacement because it's reached the equipment itself, the coil's all rotted out, needs to be replaced, and you don't put that in the budget to be replaced at some time in the near future. Eventually the equipment's going to fail, and when it does, the entire piece of equipment is going to need to be replaced. And now your cost of maintaining that thing has gone up considerably and you didn't reach the full life expectancy of that equipment to begin with. So, using the information from the client, from your subcontractors, making sure that you use that information for budget planning, for capital repair planning, and you've got a history of what needs to be done with that equipment is right at your fingertips, and you can be able to pull that right out of your CMMS platform. But as I can see, a huge percentage are not tracking any of that information back to your CMMS platform. It's not that difficult to do. It's just you're having a work order and you're going to close our PM task, and you're closing it out like you would be closing out any other PM you'd be assigning to someone else. When you look at equipment that is, when you look at making the comparison of in-house versus outsource, you need to make sure you understand the cost comparison. When I say cost comparison, you've got a salary for an individual tech that's on staff at $25 an hour plus a certain benefit load. His actual cost is $40.65. You were to subcontract that with HVAC tech to do the same work, let's say, and it's going to outside subcontract. If you can get it at $95 an hour, you're going to be very lucky today. But if you can, then it's going to cost you over twice what it costs you to perform that service in-house. So looking at that balance, as you reach a certain point, it's going to make sense to, bring that thing in-house if you have enough if you have enough hours to, to cover for that. But if it makes sense, you only got X number of hours on a weekly basis, then it makes sense to subcontract it, right? But knowing what that cost is internally and what the cost you can buy it for is very important as you go forward with your decision process. So, with completing the analysis, I say completing the analysis of, looking at the equipment that you have, looking at the what's the driving criteria for having an outsourced task versus an in-house task. It is making sure that you know what that criteria is based upon the technicality of the equipment, the task, the individuals you have on your staff, what's available to you. You need to make sure you look at all these different pieces so that you can have a conscious decision as to what makes sense to outsource and what makes sense to keep in-house. All right. You need to know the market, what's available to you, what the trades availability is in your market. And I say trades, good, making sure that the people that you can hire actually know how to maintain the equipment, and that they're willing to work with you on the standards that you set forth. I don't know how many times I've heard organizations say that, well, we can't get our subcontractor to, close out fill out a PM sheet. Well, then get another subcontractor, because I'm sure there's plenty out there that will. And especially if they own responsibility for your equipment. It's really important that you're in control of, your subcontractors, and your subcontractors are in control of you. and this way here, you're managing them and they're not managing you. So, and another key thing is making sure that you communicate with the finance team up and downstream, because as you start to reach the need for a specific trade in-house, you want to make sure that you know what that trigger point is, because now you've reached a certain point where the costs of continuing to outsource that function or that group of tasks has gone beyond what it doesn't make sense anymore. It makes sense to bring this thing in-house, and now you can be able to deliver that cost for a much lower cost. You'll be able to deliver that service for a much lower cost. And you also now have additional resources that could actually pick up other things as well. You're lowering the cost of the delivery of the service, or you're offsetting the increasing cost that is happening because as equipment age out, your maintenance responsibilities start to increase. What are some of the key takeaways? As we kind of wrap up on a lot of this, what's important is you know all the equipment that needs to be maintained, and you know when it needs to be maintained. You know how many hours that need to be maintained to take care of that equipment. You need to make sure you align the resources, to that PM plan, and that resource plan, has to have the various trades in there so that you know how many hours of the individuals that you need by function, by tasks. You need to understand what those trigger thresholds will be so you can go through that make-buy decision. It's important that you determined all this on the front end when you're planning out your preventative maintenance, so it doesn't become a problem when all of a sudden you realize you don't have the resources to do the work, and now you have to go outside. You have a plan on how your workforce is going to continuously change over the life expectancy of your facility. By having that plan in place on the front end, you won't reach a certain point where all of a sudden you're being forced to do something, which is going to end up costing you more money than what you could do it in a different manner, right? Most important thing too is hold your subcontractors accountable as you would your in-house techs, and making sure that when they make a recommendation for a specific thing, you validate that recommendation's real. You get it planned, because it becomes part of your capital repair plan, and not something that you just ignored, and you're going to wait for the subcontractor to do that work. I'll give you a good example. If you don't replace a run start capacitor on a compressor, eventually the compressor is going to burn out. So now you've ignored this problem that they've been telling you about, and it was a small item. Now all of a sudden you're down the road 6 months, 8 months, and they're coming back to do the work again. But now you continuously, overwork that piece of equipment, and now you're shortening the life of it. So, making sure the subcontractors, are completing the work that they're identifying as work that needs to be taken care of, and you're making sure that the funds are available to take care of these in-between items so you don't get to a point where equipment starts to fail on you, right? And making sure that you use that information internally for good decision making. So I'm going to open the floor up here for a couple of questions. If anyone has a question about what makes sense. If anyone has any questions out there, I'd be happy to answer them. We've got about 125 people on the call, I think, here today. So hopefully we'll have some questions of individuals that are very interested in trying to optimize their PM plan. And nothing has been popping up here. So I'm gonna move over to the here to if you have any other thoughts or questions that you might have, be happy to answer them. You can scan through them. We have a QR code here which will take you right to this particular presentation. If you have any specific questions, you can email them to me, and I'd be happy to see how I can help you out. So with that, I'm going to close it and turn it back over to you, Amanda.
Yes. So as we said, we are going to send out a follow-up message with a link to the presentation so you can watch it when you are ready. And as Bob said, feel free to reach out to him directly. And thank you so much for attending, and we hope to see you in 2026.
There was one question that did come in here, Amanda, so I'm going to see if I can best answer that. What is the best metric for measuring PM subcontracted, individual PMs, individual assets, or dollar value, right? Again, going back to hours worked for the specific tasks, because the hours worked really will relate to how many hours you need for the individual task. So one of the best metric is making sure of all the tasks that you have, how many hours of PM activities are really important. And we mentioned here about dollar value versus hours. One relates back to the other, but it's very important what the tasks are that need to be completed and how much time you need to actually spend on maintaining that equipment. So once you've developed that PM plan for the entire year and you have so many hours on each piece of equipment per so many hours per the type of equipment and how many hours per the different type of technical trades, that is really the key item. When you contract out with a subcontractor, the subcontractor is going to look at the cost of the equipment in total. They're looking at a bunch of issues tied to travel time to get there, travel time to get back, mobilization. They're looking profit, overhead. So it's really, really important that the best tracking mechanism that you use is how many hours do I need to use, be it internally or externally, to actually get the work done. So your best metric is knowing how much time is being spent on the various pieces of equipment. If anyone else has any other questions, be happy to respond. So you've got my email there. You can shoot me an email and I'll be happy to get back to you.
Great. Thank you everyone for attending today. And as I was mentioning, keep your eyes open. In 2026, we'll be bringing another series of webinars to you.